parte más importante al final, para que no se nos fueran todos a ver el fútbol. Tenemos okay, we have person from the White House and person from the State Department. And they are going to give us a briefing of their views of things happening in Latin America with the United States, and probably most important, what is going on around the world. And we have the pleasure to have among of this group of people, Ricardo Zúñiga. Ricardo Zúñiga is Senior Director for Western Hemisphere Affairs for National Security Staff. That is a very, very important position in the Obama administration. And not only that, Ricardo is from Honduras. And I think that in Honduras, should be very proud to have somebody that represents them really well here at the White House. Then we have Jeffrey Brown. Jeffrey is Deputy Assistant Secretary for Public Diplomacy, Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs. And he's going to speak in English, but he speaks fluently Spanish, as I saw it.
Yeah.
Later on, let me see that I don't get confused because they look alike a little bit. But the next one is Evan Ryan. Evan is the Assistant Secretary of State for Education and Cultural Affairs of U.S. Department of State. And Robin Lerner is the Deputy Assistant Secretary, Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs also. Then they are going to be coming to talk for a few minutes, each of them, and later on is going to be open for questions. Then Ricardo is going to be the first one.
Okay, primero, ¿cuántos hablan inglés para estar seguro de cuántos van a entenderlo cuando hacemos el discurso en inglés? Ok, bien. Perfecto, todos. Eso. Ok. I'm going to do mine in Spanish. Okay. Bueno, primero, antes de todo, muchas gracias por la invitación. Y también quiero decir que Honduras sí está bien representado, pero hay muchos países latinos representados en la Casa Blanca. Mi antecesor, colombiano, y he tenido ahí de todas partes de Latinoamérica, entonces pueden saber que hay una alta representación, como debería ser en los Estados Unidos, que ya es un país, uno de los países hispanos más importantes del mundo, y sigue siendo y creciendo esa comunidad. Bueno, yo quiero hablar solamente unos cuantos minutos, y creo que la parte más importante va a ser las preguntas y la conversación, el diálogo que vamos a tener. Pero lo que quería decir antes de todo era que la competitividad es algo de las Américas, es algo que queda al centro de la política de los Estados Unidos, de la administración Obama, hacia las Américas, hacia Latinoamérica en particular. Nuestra política, en términos de la política de desarrollo, que sigue siendo un elemento fundamental también de la política hacia las Américas, se basa en la idea que el crecimiento económico es el trabajo más importante en términos de lo que se puede hacer para elevar los indicadores sociales en todos los países. Entonces, por eso sigue que uno de los primeros deberes es hacer lo posible para facilitar el flujo de comercio y el crecimiento económico entre nuestros socios. Vemos a las Américas como una zona de oportunidad, no solamente para nuestro pueblo, pero para el mundo. Y lo que hemos visto, y yo creo que es algo muy notable en los últimos 10 años más que todo, es el incremento en las clases medias. En gran mayoría de los países, pero en gran parte de los países, pero también donde forman mayorías por la primera vez en la historia de México, de Brasil, por ejemplo. Y eso es un fenómeno no solamente económico, pero claro, social. Y lo que cambia es lo que quieren las sociedades en términos de las actividades de sus gobiernos, de lo que están haciendo los gobiernos a favor de las sociedades. Y eso lo que crea es lo que yo llamaría una situación inestable, pero inestable positiva, porque las demandas son para transparencia, para eficacia, para gestión, y todas esas demandas públicas son algo que refuerzan las capacidades de los gobiernos, y parte de esto, claro, es demandar de sus gobiernos que crean las situaciones para fomentar la prosperidad de las sociedades y para bajar niveles de inigualdad. Pero no solamente el crecimiento de las clases medias es lo que importa, también lo que vemos es que el papel de las Américas está cambiando en el mundo más que todo, por ejemplo, en términos del mercado de energía, donde las Américas van a liderar el mundo en términos del crecimiento de fuentes de energía y de recursos en los próximos 30 años. También hay una alta representación de países de las Américas en los tratados de libre comercio y de comercio más importantes del mundo, por ejemplo, la Asociación Transpacífica, una elevada representación de países de las Américas para crear la nueva generación de acuerdos comerciales. Nosotros estamos actuando de forma bilateral y multilateral para fomentar esta agenda. Por ejemplo, hemos finalizado acuerdos con Panamá, con Colombia, con México. Instalamos un diálogo de alto nivel en términos económicos con la administración del presidente Peña Nieto, con los países de Norteamérica, con Canadá y México. Hemos promovido una cumbre entre los presidentes que está enfocada en los factores o los elementos más pragmáticos del intercambio entre nuestros países, que por ejemplo en el caso de México refleja más de $1.000 millones que cruzan la frontera todos los días. Entonces es un factor fundamental para la competitividad de los Estados Unidos tener ese flujo. También, por ejemplo, hemos trabajado para fomentar acuerdos mundiales para facilitar el intercambio comercial entre los países. Tratados de libre comercio son una cosa, pero claro, como se ha reportado en varios foros, eso de facilitar el intercambio bajo los acuerdos existentes es lo que promueve más crecimiento que casi cualquier otro elemento fundamental. Bueno, pero también a la misma vez entendemos que hay mucho que hacer, y aquí es donde creo que este intercambio sería sumamente importante, porque lo que también estamos viendo es que en términos de competitividad hay partes de la región que están cayendo afuera del crecimiento económico, y que aparte de eso hay siempre el peligro de que van a caer afuera por muchos años, y eso crea niveles de inestabilidad que van a afectar a la región en total. Entonces, donde vamos a tener un enfoque importante va a ser en lo que podemos hacer, por ejemplo, en Centroamérica y en el Caribe, para incrementar la competitividad a nivel global de los países de la zona. Eso va a ser un eje central. En lo que van a hablar mis colegas acerca de la educación y el intercambio educativo, eso también es importante, porque también estamos hablando de la importancia de crear sectores productivos que van a poder competir a nivel mundial. Y ahí, por eso, la educación es fundamental. Eso se conoce muy bien. Solo un elemento: algunos periodistas han enfocado en el hecho de que en las Américas hay universidades excelentes, pero también en términos de patentes, las Américas está por atrás de muchas otras partes del mundo. Entonces, eso tiene en una economía global que está enfocada en la información, en el intercambio de información, en la innovación, eso es un factor que a largo plazo va a ser importante para mejorar y para incrementar esos niveles digamos, de producción, pero también de pesquisa y de cómo se conecta la pesquisa, la información, a la productividad y para que afecte a la población en general. Voy a estar muy interesado en tener un buen intercambio acerca de qué podemos hacer para agilizar la competitividad y el intercambio comercial, pero aparte de eso, ¿por qué no lo dejo allá y lo paso con Jeff?
Okay. Gracias Ricardo y Roberto, y muy buenas tardes a todos. Y yo sé que es algo complicado estar el último panel viernes por la tarde y además compitiendo con el Mundial. Bueno, y primero una pregunta. ¿Seguimos empatados 1-1 entre Holanda y... A ver, ¿cómo? 3-2, goleado, así que bueno. Pero ¿quién tiene Holanda ganando? Bueno, interesante. Pero aún más interesante es la temática de aquí. Vamos a hablar de la educación y el vínculo con la competitividad. Con el permiso de ustedes voy a cambiar a inglés en consideración a mis colegas. So I'm going to switch to English, but in our conversation I think we can mix Spanish, English, Portugués, lo que sea. But again, I think one of the, as Ricardo touched on, I think one of the exciting developments of 21st century diplomacy, and something kind of new, is the emerging centrality of what we're calling educational diplomacy. And certainly emblematic of that reality is the initiative that President Obama has made one of his signature initiatives in the Hemisphere, which he calls 100,000 Strong in the Americas. And it's an idea that he came up with first in 2011, and the idea was a simple idea, but quite an ambitious one. In short, to double the flow of students between the United States and the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean by the year 2020, and in both directions. So this is not just about Latin Americans going north, it's also recognizing the increasing importance of U.S. students becoming more familiar with Latin America. In addition to this initiative, one of the things that's striking, I've been a career diplomat for more than 20 years, and usually when we are arranging for bilateral meetings, the items on the agenda, there'll be trade, maybe there'll be environment, maybe energy, political issues, obviously, but in the last couple of years, country after country, in approaching us when we're developing the agenda, is locating and asking for education to be very, very high on the agenda in conversations with our President, with our Secretary of State. And it's because Latin American countries, like the United States, are so clearly seeing the critical connection between education, workforce development, and competitiveness. It's obviously not new to be focusing on education as nations, but I think what is new is the recognition that just having quality national educational opportunity is both access and quality. It's not enough. The international component is the new dimension that employers are needing. They need to be able to hire young workers, mid-level workers who have a sense of the globalized economy, who speak more than one language, who know how to navigate between cultures. That's what we feel we need here at home. It's why President Obama wants to see more American kids learning Spanish and studying in Latin America. And I think in all of the countries that you come from, there's a similar recognition that we need our students to have an international dimension to their educational experience. So that's what we're trying to achieve with 100,000 Strong. We also realize that governments can't do enough. So when the President conceived of the program, he didn't think, let's just set up another government scholarship program. We have some very good government scholarship programs, and Evan will talk about some of those kinds of traditional programs, like the Fulbright program, that many of you are familiar with. We wanted to do something that would be more flexible, more sustainable, and have a more institutional kind of focus. So the way 100,000 Strong works is it's a leveraged grant-making program with both public money. The State Department put $1 million forward, and we've raised about almost $4 million so far from the corporate sector. And because I want to create a healthy competition in the room, I'm going to mention the companies that have given so far, because we welcome this kind of generosity. ExxonMobil, Banco Santander, Freeport McMoran Cooper and Gold Foundation, Coca-Cola Foundation, Ford Foundation, all of them are contributing partners between $250,000 or $1 million so far, and they've helped build what we're calling the Innovation Fund that has allowed us so far to do 3 rounds of competitive grants that are eligible for countries throughout the hemisphere, universities throughout the hemisphere. The idea is we in the State Department don't have all the answers, and we didn't want to create a lot of criteria. We think that the educational institutions in the region are the ones that know how can you start or scale up a study abroad program, whether it's to receive more foreign students or to send more students. And we're giving grants of $25,000 or more to proposals that are partnership proposals between, let's say, a university in Honduras or Panama or Brazil with a U.S. university that together craft a proposal for how they will increase flow between their campuses. And so far, we've awarded grants to 23 institutions that are partnered with a total of 47 other institutions across 12 countries. We've got a network of universities in our 100,000 Strong Innovation Network that now numbers 900, with every country in the hemisphere represented. Diversity of opportunity and type of institution is another important point of focus, and it's been really encouraging that in this first few months, because we've only been doing these grants since November of last year when we formally launched this formal component of the program, 23 of the awards so far have gone to U.S. community colleges, which is an interesting result. 15% have gone to primarily Hispanic-serving institutions, which again is a very encouraging sign. It shows that we're reaching people not only who would be the least likely to have an international educational experience, but in many cases will be the first person in their family to even attend university. So that's a really exciting development. What we want to know from you as we move forward, again, the entire purpose of the program is to help our universities be producing the kinds of people that you need to hire. So it really helps when we hear from you that, you know, are you having trouble finding certain kinds of engineers, certain kinds of environmental scientists, certain other types of people with skills? That's exactly the feedback loop we want to be creating so that the universities can craft the right kinds of programs to be educating people in the way that you need so that they're the right kind of people that you want to hire. And then we want to be trying to make sure that our grants go toward those universities to strengthen those programs and create that flow of students. So we're really trying to create a virtuous circle of students who can enter the workforce, maybe have an internship experience. That's also something we really look for your support. In some cases, you may be able to support with financial resources. In other cases, it may be with an internship experience, which would be hugely valuable, hopefully for you as a company, but also for the students who get to have that experience. So I won't take more time now, but look forward to your thoughts and your comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Good afternoon, everyone. I know that we're coming to you at the end of a long day, so we really appreciate you being here with us, and hopefully it's helpful, and we can have a good discussion. As Jeff mentioned, the real goal of 100,000 Strong is to look at how can we tie higher education and workforce development and the private sector together to achieve the goals that we all have for the hemisphere. And I think that really the private sector is key in this regard. Education diplomacy has been a real pillar in the 21st century in statecraft. You find, especially as we hear from our own secretary, that it's something that comes up as he travels the world, and I'm sure the same is true of, in your countries, that this is a really important issue around the world. And through 100,000 Strong in the Americas, we're actually seeing real progress and growth in partnerships that are helping us reach different audiences and bring people here to the United States, as well as sending US students overseas, that just strengthens the connection and the bond throughout the hemisphere. Because we have the same challenges throughout the hemisphere, and in order to lift us all up, better to have minds working together. And the only way we're actually going to break down barriers that still remain and help understand one another better is to bring the young minds that we have in all of our countries together to help them understand one another through these exchanges and through education. We think that's a really powerful way to break down barriers, preconceived notions, and just give someone a better understanding of one another's country. Across the Americas, foreign government and private sector contributions to the Fulbright program have almost quintupled in the past decade. We have a groundswell of support for 100,000 Strong through the Fulbright portion of this, and we're very excited about that. What we want to do is build on that, even beyond that, beyond the Fulbright groundswell that we've seen. We're interested in the vital link between our higher education system and the opportunities our countries need to create for our young people. As Jeff mentioned, we want to be sure that we are aware of the skills that this generation of students needs in order to succeed in the workforce, and that's where you all come in the private sector. We want to make sure that our colleges and universities are also adapting to these growing needs, and that the courses they're teaching are really applicable to what the student is going to be facing when they come out of college and start their careers. And how can partnerships and exchanges, and this is an area that we've been looking a lot at, how can, and a lot of our discussions with other countries throughout the hemisphere, how can we think of innovative ways to address these issues of education and innovative ways to look at exchanges that specifically target the needs that we've spotted? So ECA is working to address, ECA is my bureau, the Education and Cultural Affairs Bureau, and we're working to address these challenges through a few lines of effort. Currently, we offer exchange programs such as the Fulbright program, which I'm sure you've heard of, a State Department program. We also have the Community College Initiative, the Benjamin A. Gilman Scholarship, which is a very interesting scholarship, and I always like to raise this with people. It's a scholarship administered by the US Department of State, and it's only available to students who have financial aid. Because when you think about exchanges, a barrier often for a student is the financial burden of going overseas for a semester of education or a year of education. And we're very proud of the Benjamin Gilman Scholarship because we've had great success in reaching a different audience. And that is something that we're really working on in 100,000 Strong. It's just an area that I think could be very interesting to the private sector as well. If you're interested in learning more about how we've developed these scholarships, we're very willing, able to speak to you about that. We also have our global UGrad programs, and all of these work to demonstrate our commitment to just expanding two-way exchanges across the hemisphere. These are global exchanges, but exchanges that really do apply as well right here in this hemisphere. We also have a system called Education USA. Education USA provides students outside of the United States with information about what do you need to study in the United States. What are the testing requirements? What are the college applications like, and what are our essay requirements overall? Our Education USA network is a really wonderful advising resource for students in other countries, and it's completely affiliated with the U.S. Embassy. It's the best way to locate an Education USA resource, but it's something I would really encourage people to look at because I know that it's very hard to figure out how to take that first step, and Education USA really does give you the path to take that first step. Also, to prepare future generations of exchange students, we work on providing English language learning. This is something that we've worked on around the world, but we know that we need to help English teachers learn best practices on how to teach English. And that's something we've really worked hard on, and it's something I have to say there's a huge demand on us to provide. And so we do find that anywhere we're looking in the world, English language is a real demand. But we're working with other countries to see how we can best facilitate that and use our programs. We have a few programs that address this because we do know that in order to study in the United States, English would be a requirement. So it's a focus that we have across the board as well. But as Jeff mentioned, the best way for us to achieve 100,000 strong, the only way really for us to achieve 100,000 strong, is with private sector engagement. It's private sector looking at scholarship opportunities, private sector looking at internship opportunities. And we've found, because I deal with exchange students all the time, day in and day out, and I can't tell you how transformative it is, and how the skills that they learn, the way they're able to navigate after they've finished their exchange, just puts them at a tremendous advantage to their peers who have not had the same experience. And that is something I think is really valuable to all of you in the private sector who are hiring. I recently participated in a roundtable discussion at the White House where President Obama convened education through, to give Carter credit, he pulled this together, convened education and industry leaders to discuss ways that we can all work together. And there are a number of ways that you can get involved, including supporting the 100,000 Strong Innovation Fund that Jeff Brown mentioned. You could also partner with us to support or expand programs that we have that would bring more U.S. students to your countries or bring your students to the U.S., and that would be the Fulbright program. In Mexico, I just want to note, we have a program that we found has been very successful and will be of interest, I hope, to you. It's called the Fulbright Binational Business Program. And students who travel on this program are enrolled in academic studies in Mexico, but they also have an internship at a Mexican company. And the students I've spoken to who've been through this program just rave about that partnership between the academic scholarship as well as the internship in the Mexican company, which really puts them on the path for potential hires, as you can imagine, and has been a great success. So there are real opportunities for all of you in the private sector, for companies across the board to sponsor internship opportunities for students or partner with higher education institutions, colleges, universities, exchange organizations, to support programs that facilitate this kind of exchange across the Americas. As I said, our societies are interconnected, and as we expand opportunities for educational exchanges, scientific research partnerships, and cross-border innovation, we really are on the path to developing a 21st century workforce across the hemisphere. And that will lead to increased employment, but also to increased competitiveness. So I look forward to working with all of you as we work to prepare this next generation, so I hope you'll join us and get on board. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Robin Lerner. I actually work for Evan, and I don't know if there's a word in Spanish for the last person on the last panel of the last day. I hope it's not
Pobrecita
sucker
would be the word.
Pobrecita. Hope it's not sleeping pill. What's that?
Poor little.
I'm going to try to be exciting. One of the areas that Evan oversees and I do for her is something that really is all about the private sector, and that is the J-1 Visa Exchange Visitor Program. Many of you may have come to the United States at some point on a J-1 visa. Raise your hand. Wow, no? Okay. The J-1 visa is actually very well known. It is the way in which the exchange programs that the State Department oversees. It's a mechanism now that we work with the private sector and allow them to do exchange programs for us. We oversee it, but it's the private sector going about the business of bringing people into the United States for specific reasons. And one of the big reasons that people come, one of the categories, is for internships. And I wanted to talk about this today because we had, in 2013, globally, we had 26 to 28,000 interns that came and interned in an American company, either for credit or for a stipend or full payment in a company. In the Hemisphere, we had about, I have this in my notes actually. I'm terrible about reading my notes. And I'm looking at my staff over there. About 3,500 from the Hemisphere total came in an internship. And for us, we see what we call this private sector exchange. And we can't possibly fund all the people that we would like to have come into the United States on a cultural or educational program. We simply can't pay for that. In 2013, we had 280,000 people come here on a type of privately funded exchange. And that is incredibly important to us. What we do is we designate an entity as a sponsor of an exchange. We draft regulations, and they have to do their exchanges according to our regulations. But it's a real win-win. And the ways in which you all can get involved, I mean, we have seen in all these conversations we've had about 100,000 strong or public diplomacy period in the region is you all want people you need people who speak English, and you need Americans who will speak Spanish. One of the biggest things I've heard is businesses need people who get the culture in each country. So if we send students up here, will they be prepared to work to bring business from your company into the United States or vice versa? Will they know how to show up and comport themselves in an American company and succeed? So having an on-the-job internship, we've seen a lot of companies sort of light up. Yes, we'd love to do that. We want to be part of that. That will really help our business. From our selfish side of the State Department, that is an avenue for increased understanding. I mean, whether you have a bottom line for it and the intern has a bottom line for it, what's going to happen is they're going to acquire much stronger English skills. They're going to make friends in the workplace. They're going to understand our culture, and they're going to go home and talk about what a great experience they had, and thus kind of proliferate more people wanting to come. And it's just good for all of us. So I know I don't want to drone on because I know it's the end of a couple of days, but I wanted to tell you just a little bit that some of the entities that are sponsors are exchange organizations. They can help a company find somebody, and what they do is the company will then pay the stipend for the participant and maybe travel expenses, and the participant themselves will pay a fee to the sponsor to help do their paperwork. One of the things we've been talking with governments about is maybe having scholarships to cover the fee. Usually it can be from several $100s to maybe up to $1,500, say, for example, the administrative fee to do all the paperwork and do the matching. Imagine a government pays that small amount for a person to come, and then they have a placement in a private sector or nonprofit or academic environment. We could really increase the number of people that can come and the diversity of people. So we have all this information in the State Department. I'm happy to share this and how companies can get involved. But it's an avenue that we wanted to bring to your attention today. And I will leave it up there so we can get to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, all of you, for that beautiful presentation in the two different areas, competitiveness and education, basically, and how that get linked. But, okay, they wanted to have question from you.
I have a question. To make things easier for the people in the hemisphere to come and study here, is there a way to do something a little bit parallel of what happens in Europe? For example, a Spaniard can go to Ireland, study, work, and pretty much have movement around. One of the problems, I guess, in the middle and the lower classes is for students to come here, they're going to have to pay for their living expenses and the like, and most of the student visas, as I understand it, do not allow you to work or limited work. Is there a possibility of that?
Is that the Erasmus program? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that it's hard to, I mean, I hate to, I'll jump in. It's very hard to compare us to Europe and the European Union, which is, you know, so many different countries, and they've made that agreement. I mean, you could look at our states that way. The J1 visa, and I will say, coming through a sponsor, a lot of these are universities that will bring people in. But I mean, this is why I wanted to talk about the privately funded, in that if you do an internship and you get a paid internship, you actually can make back the investment to come. There are lots of ways in which people can do this, and they don't, you may have heard of them and not realize they were an exchange program. But we do have summer programs where university students come on what we call the summer work travel program. And both Southern Hemisphere and Northern Hemisphere people can come at during their respective summers. But they come and they can work for 3 months here and have a month to travel. And they can come on their university breaks. And the idea of that is that you can get people who can pay themselves back. So they can at least
get paid.
They can break even. They get paid. They work in a job. We also have exchange teachers, and that's the thing that I actually would recommend every country in your hemisphere really look at, because the demand for Spanish language instruction is growing all the time in this country. And they actually come through a sponsor, and they are a teacher in a school system. And we also have au pairs, for example. Young women and men as well, but primarily women get involved, and many come from your hemisphere. They get to live with an American family, they take care of kids, but they have a chance to live here for 1 to 2 years. And while they may not come home wealthy, they will have had a long-term experience in this country. So those are ways in which this program tries to deal with the funding issue. I don't know.
I would just add one thing, because costs are one of the barriers to increasing student exchange. And under the 100,000 strong format, one of the things we're trying to, when we talk about the university to university partnerships, a lot of times one of the very first elements of those agreements will be not only dual recognition of the credits that are involved, obviously, so no one loses time in their semester abroad. It counts toward the degree in their home institution, but also, especially when we can have the ideal situation, which is two-way flow, you'll get around the asymmetry of tuition costs. In most of Latin America, obviously, as you know, the public universities are either free or very low tuition, and our universities, certainly the private ones, but even the public ones, in comparative terms, are much more expensive. So we have the American kid will be paying his tuition to his home institution in the States while on his semester experience in the Latin American country, and the Latin American will be paying only the tuition that he or she was paying back at the home institution. So it kind of keeps the costs equalized, and the institutions aren't losing because the spaces are working. So.
But the bulk of the students in Latin America live at home. So there's
Right, for the living, right.
being outside of the house. Versus the bulk of the students in the United States live on campus.
Right, and in the best agreements, because we do have dormitories in our universities, and there's some student housing in some Latin American universities, but they address the housing situation within the context of the agreement, again, to try to neutralize that cost factor.
Because we also have that case here in the United States where there are students, for whatever reason, that may not be receiving federal aid, federal financial aid, receiving private scholarships, and the scholarships will take into account their living expenses as well. It's just as a model, I use that as an example.
Okay, other question?
Thank you for such a great presentation. You've been talking a lot about partnership with the private sector, but it seems like the partnership is only about money. What about working with the HR departments to help capacitate through these universities to administer better skill training? Because otherwise, if you have a bunch of students coming here learning about, I don't know, political science, then we might have a lot of strong-minded politicians, but not a lot of capable workers. So I'd like to hear your comments on that.
No, I think it's a great point. It's
Yeah.
the community college model in the
Exactly.
U.S.
Yeah.
is where that
Really-
kind of synergy is
Yeah.
working really well, and we're working very hard to share that model with Latin American countries. And I know when I've traveled and when Evan has traveled, we've met with like AmChams and with the HR people in companies to connect them with the universities and create that kind of dialogue in terms of curriculum development that has now become really present, especially in our community college system.
Yes.
And it's getting a lot of resonance because it does work so well.
And I'll also raise, I know, Ricardo, we made sure that was a big piece of the conversation we had with the president and the private sector representatives who were there. We asked the companies who were there what were the skills they saw lacking, what were what was needed right now, and it was a really, I thought, a very good discussion. And it's something that we've talked about, as Jeff said, when we traveled to other countries. What do you find? And I do think a lot of these other countries in our dialogues have found our community college system to be a very good model in terms of vocational training, because what's unique about the American community college system is it's very much responsive to that specific community, to looking at the private sector needs in the specific community and tailoring the courses to address that skill set. So it's something that we've actually used when we've spoken to other countries about. But no, this is a big piece of it, honestly, with the private sector is what are the needs that you see? And I do remember the discussion we had was very good about that. And also, would you consider internships, as we mentioned, as another option? So not purely the financial scholarship route, although we like that as well.
Okay, another question in the area of education or competitiveness here. Or there.
O lo que sea.
O lo que sea.
Lo que sea.
Sí, no.
Eso es-
Well, our Latin people, mainly Mexicans from Honduras, El Salvador, people that work here, maybe not legally, but work here in the States, could be very good ambassadors to the American culture if they can get back. You're already spending money on them, on education. Education is free for all of them here in the States. So couldn't there be, within your program, specific way to try to encourage those people who already know the culture of the States, have been educated in the States, how to get back with some specific programs? They could be very good ambassadors to this kind of philosophy.
Yeah. So you're saying people who are here already and have had experience working in the United States, bringing that culture back to their... Yeah.
Yes, but with a specific program where you can get them back together with local governments, so they get
I
it
think,
back.
no, I think that's a great idea. I think that's something we could definitely work on.
Yeah, I
right?
think it's a really interesting idea. We don't have a program just like that takes the Hispanic American communities in the U.S. and taps into them with some kind of a special, we could call it like a service exchange back, where they would go back and give maybe for a year or something.
Yeah, that's a way. That's a way. you're already willing to spend some money
Yeah.
Right.
trying to bring them here to
But I
the
think
States.
I think it's a great idea for us to look at.
Yeah, I think so, and I think you have some examples that are already out there. In the case of El Salvador, there are very strong community groups that tend to be active here and fostering not just development but business development in their communities back home. And that I cite El Salvador because there tends to be a particular. There are many examples there of entire communities that are living, remain closely knit in the communities that they've established in the United States and maintain a contact back. But it makes a very good deal of sense to be able to make best use of, and actually this comes up very often in terms of small business development and helping not just first generation, but communities with an affiliation or ties back to the Americas. Very often are not major exporters, and so there's this all comes kind of together in that area. This is an interesting phenomenon that Latino-owned businesses in the United States very often are not involved in exports back, and these are businesses that know communities and have these contacts back. So it actually can work in a couple of different directions.
Yeah, I would say I'm thinking of the special Chinese program where they are trying to repatriate back people with PhDs that are working here in the States, and they spend a lot of money doing that. Well, that has a different objective, but with internships where you could collaborate with local companies from Mexico, from El Salvador, from Honduras, to try to bring back for 1 year those people who already have a lot of things that can help local governments. I think that it will be cheaper than all around program.
Just to comment, I think that's very interesting. And there are, I think that's the beauty of having a U.S. sponsor for this kind of our exchanges, where it's an organization that basically finds placements they can either work with the government, or they work with the university, or they market just to the public at large in a particular country. But we have certain bilateral agreements with certain countries to have an internship program. And often you'll see that they will be placed in a company with a first or second generation from their country. And in a way, that's great for initiating the system and the model, and it makes it easier, and there's an interest on the private sector side, and it makes it easier for the participant to come. But then we think it's in the interest of the individual to go beyond that, but I think that's a really good idea. And I will say that at the State Department, we have our Global Partnerships Office that does work with diaspora communities. And I don't know if that's exactly what you're talking about, diaspora, but they're very powerful voices in the government here and in creating linkages back. So I think for us, the thing that we have to do is have greater awareness of these avenues, like the ones that Evan was talking about, what exists through 100,000 Strong, what exists through the J1, so that they can support in very specific and concrete ways that increasing the number of exchanges or people to people across the borders. So you give us a very good idea to think about. Sometimes I think we have all these programs, but nobody knows about them. Yeah. So it's always an effort to get the word out there.
Yeah.
Okay, Ricardo was expecting some tough question for him, and he's a piece of cake. No, this Honduras, tough. We have so many problems: drugs, security, endurance, violence. What is going on? Okay, you need.
Yeah, Ricardo, although there's a lot of collaboration between Honduras and the States in the anti-drug efforts, lately we seem to have gotten into a drop goal. We have passed a no-flight zone law. It seems to have not been something your government liked, but it's the law in our country. And the feeling that's coming out, at least the media is treating it as the U.S. will not allow Hondurans to have a viable air force, which I'm probably exaggerating a bit, but that's the way it's coming out. What can we all do to make sure we continue the collaboration and simply agree to disagree on some specific items?
So now that's a good question. And I think, number one, every single government that we have a relationship with, we have areas where we agree to disagree. And certainly, I would say this is very much in this area. But let me just be very specific about this, because I think that there's been a great deal of misinformation, first of all, about the nature of this and how it's being reflected in the relationship. I think, let me start off by saying that the problems of violence that are being suffered in Honduras are incredibly serious. They've certainly affected members of my family there. This is something that I've seen taking place. So I know that it's a society that feels like it is under assault by crime, by drug trafficking, but by organized crime and disorganized crime even more. I would say that is the reason why we have invested so heavily in the security relationship that we've had with Honduras and that we're going to continue to have. With respect to the aerial interdiction law that the government of Honduras passed, so there's two things here. First, most of the drugs that are reaching Honduras are not coming by air. And there was a perception that most of and this is true everywhere. There is hardly anywhere in the world where most of the drug flow is by air, but in Central America in particular, more than 80% of it is arriving by sea. And so when you're talking about the nature of the problem is not one where that is the biggest factor. But we do think it's a factor. If you're talking 15% in a situation where you're moving hundreds of tons of cocaine through a country, that's still a lot of drugs. So that's not something that we want to see eliminated. So the policy of the United States has been to provide information, air track information about suspected flights all over, in countries wherever we have this agreement. Under U.S. law, we don't have the authorization to shoot down a civilian aircraft because it's suspected of trafficking drugs. And beyond that, if the United States government is providing assistance to a country that has its own shoot-down law, which is the sovereign decision of a country, then U.S. personnel are legally liable for anything that happens with that information. So, in other words, Honduras does have the right to have the law. It has. That is, this is a discussion that we had with the president when he first came in, and so that's the decision there. So effectively, what we did was agree to disagree on that element. What that means, though, is that anything that contributes to the ability of Honduras to shoot down an aircraft is something that we cannot legally support, or we are individually liable, legally liable for doing that. So that's a decision of the government of Honduras. And what we can do is focus on the 85% of the rest of the problem, really the heart of the problem, which is on the maritime side. And there, U.S. Southern Command, Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Department of State, through programs funded by the U.S. Department of State, have maintained very strong levels of cooperation with the government of Honduras to deal with that maritime flow. But none of this should minimize the fact that Honduras is suffering tremendously from the impact of crime in general, including drug trafficking, and that we are going to be very, very close partners. So I think the real take-home story here should not be a distraction over a very small subset of the problem where we simply have different positions. In the case of combating organized crime, we are going to be the strongest partner that Honduras, I think, is going to have alongside the neighbors in dealing with this problem. So there you can be absolutely certain.
Okay, well, the last question. Okay, no.
Ricardo, we have talked a lot about trade agreements between Latin America and the United States. But yesterday, Congressman Lee Kerry mentioned that he also welcomes investment of foreign countries or foreign businessmen into the United States. Is there any incentives that could facilitate for our neighbors in Latin America to come and invest in the United States, because sometimes we feel it's difficult even to get even a driver license. You need to get Social Security. If you try to get a loan, if you don't have Social Security, you're not liable for credit. So is there ways, is there incentives, is there a path if you want to invest here in the United States that we can go get guidance?
So first of all, on the top line question about encouraging foreign investment in the United States, I think one of the phenomena that we've seen working overseas in the last 10 years, I think, is surprise in communities overseas. My last overseas post was in Brazil, and I can't tell you how many delegations came through, Governor Deval Patrick, governors from California, governors from all over the United States coming to promote foreign investment in their communities. And it seemed a little bit unusual because normally the common perception was that these trade delegations were going to promote the export of U.S. goods to the country that they were visiting. But I can tell you, foreign investment is as important to the United States as U.S. foreign investment is for our partners overseas. So absolutely. Now, the Department of Commerce does have the lead in broad terms in promoting foreign investment in the United States. But what we find is, and the reason why governors tend to be the ones who lead these kinds of delegations is because we're so, where those incentives usually come is at the state and local level in terms of encouraging the investment through tax breaks, through skills training, access to a skilled workforce, and access to universities. But what you're talking about is with respect to the individual investor who wants to come and establish themselves in the United States. And I do agree that coming to the United States is very complicated, and establishing yourself here. For major investors, many of you are probably familiar with the e-visa, and so the visa side of it can be established, but it is harder if you're not a permanently based person, but in fact have a big business presence here because you have a business that you have established in the United States. I think that there's a lot that can be done through the state governments in terms of that portion of it. I think with respect to what the portion you're talking about sounds to me like the establishment of the Social Security number or a tax identification number, something along those lines. That I can tell you I am not an expert in, but it is a comment that I've heard others say, so we know that that's an issue that I have discussed with the Department of Commerce as an area where they need to do some work. I'm not sure if I got...
Well, if I understand it, as a person it's more difficult. How about a corporation? If a foreign corporation wants to invest here, is that easier or is the same thing?
Well, that does tend to be, for the foreign corporation, it tends to be easier because you're essentially establishing yourself here as a U.S. corporation. You are creating the U.S. Entity, what is going to be, it's going to have its own tax identification. It's going to, essentially you're creating, by building it here, you're creating an entity here that is not foreign itself. You're now an offshoot of another one. Yes, there are complex legal questions with respect to tax and repatriation and where that is, but that tends to be focused on the state or the municipality. That's where that part becomes important. So articles of incorporation, where it's easiest to do, tends to vary quite a bit by state. That's why Delaware, for example, is one of the states where there's such a high presence of foreign companies, because that's a state where it's very easy to do. Whereas in another state, I'm not going to name any, where it's hard to do, but in some states it is more challenging to do. But there tends to be, because you're not, it's not an individual who's coming with a nationality. You're creating a brand new entity in the United States that's going to have that identity.
Ricardo, could you comment a little bit on the delegation that went to Cuba from the Chamber of Commerce,
U.S. Chamber of Commerce delegation,
and the other people that went, and what next steps you think might happen to open up that market eventually for us?
So In the case of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce delegation that went, I mean, there's sort of two parts of it. One is that there is already a fairly substantial legal commerce between the United States and Cuba. For a while, we were the largest provider of food. We're still the second largest provider of food. And we were the fourth or fifth largest trading partner of Cuba, which was unusual in a situation where you have an embargo. And you're actually a very strong trading partner of that country. But you know, the bigger question of the embargo and sanctions is going to have to be resolved by the U.S. Congress. What we're seeing, what we have done as a government, kind of across the board, is this administration's been very focused on what you can do practically. As a matter of practicality, Cuba is a neighbor. Cuba, we have a very strong flow of our population moving back and forth. What the administration did at the very beginning in 2009 was make it easier for people who have contact, who have ties to Cuba, family members in Cuba, to be able to make sure that their family members had the resources and information available so that they could take greater charge over their own lives. So we have pursued, I think, in general, we've engaged with Cuba on issues like immigration, on issues like postal service, on issues like being able to have a stronger search and rescue capacity, counter-narcotics cooperation, on a number of other issues that are quite practical, where we see it as benefiting, you know, basically the life and safety of American citizens. We're going to be doing what we can there. What we also have done, for example, that I don't think is particularly well known, is made it possible, for example, for U.S. telecom providers to provide roaming services in Cuba. We authorized fiber optic connections between the United States and Cuba. We authorized satellite communications between the United States and Cuba. It is true that it's also a market of, it's not a huge market. It's 11 million people. So for major corporations, it's still an area of, it's still a boutique issue as opposed to an area where there's going to be major investment. The purpose of the Chamber of Commerce delegation was to indicate that there should be some movement, there should be some support for the growth of a private sector in Cuba, and moreover, it was a position that the U.S. Chamber has across the board, which is to be opposed to sanctions in general. So that was another purpose of the visit. What I can tell you is that we have seen some changes in Cuba. For example, they lifted the restrictions on the ability of Cubans to be able to leave their own country, to be able to travel, and that's a positive move. They freed a large number of political prisoners in 2010. At the same time, we're seeing that Cuba has arrested thousands of people just since the beginning of the year, including a day before yesterday, a massive sweep against fairly prominent dissidents, throwing them in jail. So while we are embarked on trying to have a more constructive relationship with Cuba, there are some serious impediments, and one of them is that Cuba remains an authoritarian government that limits basic freedoms that are protected in the rest of the hemisphere, and that's always going to be an issue. And then finally, I can't leave without mentioning the situation of Alan Gross, the USAID contractor who's jailed in Cuba and who's obviously quite desperate to be able to leave for what we think was a serious injustice in terms of what sentence he's serving for the crime for which he was accused. So that is an impediment to having more constructive relations between our two countries. But where we can do things that are going to increase the ability of individual Cubans to create their own success, be able to live with greater freedom from the state, we're going to do that, because over time, it's important that as Cuba develops, as Cuba evolves, that there be a group of people who are prepared to help the country progress. And so there is merit in helping people start to develop that kind of a commitment and ability, and to give them the resources so they can do that. And again, that's probably the future.
Talking about constructive relationships, would you care to comment a little bit about Venezuela?
I think on that we're out of here. No, look, the situation in Venezuela is incredibly frustrating, because what we're seeing there is a government that could be democratic, where there is the ability to be democratic, which has democratic commitments as a signatory to the to multiple instruments, and including the Inter-American Democratic Charter and others, where it has very clear responsibilities to its citizens. And moreover, there was an election a year ago where nearly 50% of the population indicated a certain distance from the government. And when you have an election that's that close, really the expectation is that the government is going to find ways to build consensus, realize it doesn't have a mandate. But in this case, what happened was, in fact, you had a sharpening of those differences. Just in terms of what's happening right now, I mean, very clearly, there are political prisoners in Venezuela. Very clearly, the playing field is being tilted against a very large segment of the population. There have been significant abuses against the population. There are students who are jailed and are facing potential longer jail time for exercising their freedoms, not for carrying acts of destruction out. But and then you have the case of Leopoldo Lopez, who's looking at a trial for inciting violence in a case where it was very clearly agents of the state that were involved in committing the violence. So we've been very clear in supporting an effort by the governments of South America to encourage a dialogue between the government and the opposition to address some of these very concrete problems, very concrete abuses that they've been the victims of. We haven't seen progress in that, and as many of you have probably seen, there's a push in the Congress to have some kind of sanctions, not broad economic sanctions, but targeted sanctions against people who are believed to have carried out human rights abuses. And in that case, we want there to be a successful process led by South American governments, but we're also aware that if there isn't progress in that, we're going to probably have to express our opinions and essentially do it in a targeted way to those who are involved in committing the most serious abuses. So that's a possibility, one we hope to avoid, but that is very real. That's probably
Okay, Ricardo, and all of you, I am not going to make more questions, but I'm going to comment on what happened yesterday and today in related to trade, and we're going to deliver you a letter that was given to Walter Bastian in some concerns that are right now in Central America in 3 topics. One is some trade-related situation with the money, tobacco, and meat. And then meat is related to a quota that is going to be open in Brazil probably to the United States, that is going to be used versus the quota of Central America. Then it's a major concern. The other one is the subsidy for the mani, peanuts, okay? And the other is another situation that is against competitiveness, that is the tobacco, that has to be also allowed tobacco that is, the cost is over $10. And if then they are producing tobacco less than $10, probably will not come. They were making some numbers that probably that if that happened, the situation with the meat, this situation with the tobacco, and this situation with the money, in Nicaragua and Honduras is going to be probably an unemployment of over 100,000 people. And those 100,000 people are going to be looking north. It's not for comments, it's just to give you the letter, then Enrique, you can give the letter that was given, right? The letter that was given to the Secretary of Commerce and through Walter Bastian. But anyway, that you have it, and it's important. Besides that, I appreciate a lot your time, your explanation, and you see that these business people are more interested in education than in politics. You had a very softballs, throwing to you, then that was good. But anyway, thank a lot for your time, and with this, we give the thanks to these people.
Thank you.
Aló, miren que los que van a ir o los que vamos a ir al cóctel de Panamá, hay un bus esperándonos afuera.